Hey, welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. Glad to have you. Today's episode is sponsored by Habitly.com, where you can learn the habits of highly successful people. We have short animated clips. We have longer courses. You can do them with your team. Very valuable for as a team. Soft skills are not taught today. They're often not taught in the home. They're certainly not taught in most schools. Very quick, very easy to learn them on Habitly and get your team really performing at a high level. Check it out at Habitly.com. Today's episode is with Gustavo Razzetti. He's the CEO and founder of Fearless Culture, a culture design consultancy. He's got this cool thing called a culture design canvas that's a framework to help you really maximize your culture. He's also written a book called Remote, Not Distant, where he talks about workplace culture in a hybrid or a remote workplace. We had a good discussion. He gave some good tips on how you can strengthen your culture. Let's dive in. Gustavo, I'm very curious. You have something I haven't heard of before, and that is the Culture Design Canvas. And I guess it's a framework you use with different companies, but can you talk to me about that? Because it sounds very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing when I shifted my career and started working on culture. One of the things I realized is everyone believes that culture matters. All leaders know that culture is really critical, but no one knows how to put culture in words. Culture usually feels like something very abstract, very hard to describe. So I came up with this tool that basically is a way to mapping and codifying what's the existing culture. We use this with different types of companies, but also with startups. I always say that the moment you create a company, even there's a few people there, you already have a culture in place. So the first thing that we do with the culture design canvas is understand what's the current culture. There are things that are working, things that are not working, things that are not so good. And then you can use the same tool to decide, okay, where do you want to take the culture? How do you want to move the culture into the future?
I like the concept of the canvas, almost like an artist laying things out. Now, I'm not an artist, so maybe that's part of the reason I appreciate it so much is I respect it. But what does that look like when you dive in and then you start to paint this canvas?
Absolutely. I think that I'm a little bit of an artist, but more of a cook. I like to cook. And I think that the canvas is basically understanding what you have on the fridge. What are the ingredients that you have, the spices that are on your shelf, everything that's in place. And most important, which are the ones that you want? Because sometimes flavors can crash and compete against each other. So it's not only what you have, but also what are the things that you want to reinforce and use more, and what are the things that you want to remove because they are not necessarily creating the ideal flavor or outcome for your culture. So I think that that's why, to your point, it's a canvas in which we uncover what's going on. We need to surface because lots of those ingredients exist but are not visible. So the first step is to make that culture visible, to make it more explicit so leaders can understand how people see culture. And this is important because we do sessions with different groups across the organization. The way leaders at the top see or think of their culture is completely different from what the people are living the day-to-day that are closer to the customers, closer to the problems, actually experience that culture.
I'm wondering if you have an example of where some leaders thought their culture was one thing, but it was actually very different, or maybe it was multiple cultures within one company because they're not connecting. And so cultures are kind of popping up per division or something like that.
That's a good point. I'm going to start from the latter. The notion of subcultures. So there's a difference between a subculture and a silo. No company culture is homogeneous. There's always the end result of a company culture is the sum of different subcultures. And that's good because as human beings, we connect with smaller groups. So the culture of the tech team or the customer service team are usually slightly different because of the nature. For example, sales. The subcultures as a sales team usually is more aggressive than those of the marketing people that are more in the ideation kind of approach. The point is when those subcultures are in conflict, when there are silos because they don't talk to each other, they don't connect to each other. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
Interesting. So that reminds me, I remember reading years ago that some companies will have their core values, and yet certain divisions within the company will stay consistent with those values, but then they'll kind of tweak them a little bit for their own group. So they're slightly different, but they're still consistent with the overall values. Have you seen that?
Yeah, and that we encourage, especially when it comes to the behaviors, because in the end, values matter, but what matters the most are behaviors. You asked previously one experience we have with leaders, and one thing that comes across is that leaders think that their culture is one thing, but then people think the culture is different. So one element of the culture canvas is the behaviors we reward and punish. Because your values mean nothing if then what leaders decide, the things that they reinforce, the things that they reward, don't align. Usually you have leaders that say, hey, my culture is a culture of collaboration. But then who they promote? The least collaborative manager, those who hide information, those who operate in a silo. They say we're really innovative. We're innovative, idea-centric culture. We want people to think like a startup. But then when we talk to their employees, what they say is, hey, I'm afraid of making mistake. There's a lot of red tape. If I screw up, I'm going to be blamed and even punished, and at some point maybe fired from my job.
Well, so have you had situations where you start down this cultural canvas approach and the leaders think it's one way and they get feedback it's another way, and the leaders do not want to accept that?
Yeah, that's usually the case, but I think that one of the approaches that we have is we filter the type of clients that we're going to work with. We know that if people reach out, it's because there's something going on, right? But we always tell leaders, are you willing to get pushback? Are you willing to hear things that might not be so cool or so positive or different? Are you willing for your thinking to be challenged? If they're not into that, we don't want to work with those companies because we're going to waste our time and their time. That doesn't mean there's not going to be resistance. People resist, leaders resist. They have their own strong ideas. They're smart, and some of the smart people like self-awareness. But in the end, what we're telling is you can only fix the problems you know. So basically, not understanding what's going on is going to basically enforce that things that are not necessarily helping your company move into the right direction.
So when you have a situation where there's a lack of alignment on how you want to get the culture aligned, homogeneous the way you said, how do you help people work through that?
I think one element, and I finished an engagement with a large company, a global company. We're working with their IT leadership team, thousands of people. And we work first with executive team leaders and then with the extended leadership team. And one thing that when we're wrapping up the session, the extended leadership team felt, hey, we are super aligned. We're on the same page. We want to accomplish the same things. And the top leaders say, no, we're not aligned. And for anyone, this might feel like, oh, these guys feel that they're working in different companies. And what we try to uncover and help them is, look, you're talking about two different elements, right? The people, the extended team feel they are aligned because they're buying into your dream. They're buying into this shared future that you leaders want to bring. But you are way ahead of the curve, like leaders always are. Your thinking, your experience is 3, 5, maybe 10 steps ahead of your team. And that doesn't mean that they are not aligned. They are operating at a different rhythm. So rather than show that you're not aligned, you need to bring them closer to you. So don't focus on the gap. That's my advice. Help them come closer to where you want to be. And also realize that leaders always have their heads and their minds like 10,000 steps ahead. That's why they're leading, right? They're seeing the end destination, but they don't need to forget that to get to that destination, we all need to walk the talk and get there.
Interesting. Do you use scenarios at all to help people grasp what the values are in different situations? So get them talking about that to see whether there's alignment or not?
Yeah, sure. I think that one of the things that we do is what we call like blameless retrospective. So kind of revisiting things that went wrong, a project, an initiative, an incident within the company, but without the blame. And we use that to reflect how we reacted, because in the end, when there's an incident and something goes wrong, the response that the team has is usually led by their values, personal or collective as a team. So in that regards, yes, we do that a lot to see where than future scenarios, we use past scenarios and what happened, how we reacted, who tried to learn, who blame each other, who tried to maybe turn off the fire, but create a bigger incident by rushing into the solution without understanding what the real root cause was.
And it's interesting when you bring up that, they're making decisions based on their values. Now, do you find that oftentimes or how often are people making decisions based on their personal values or their individual values versus the values of the organization that have been agreed to?
That's a great point, because I think that sometimes corporate values are meaningless and they need to be connected to your personal values, especially from a leadership standpoint. So when we're working on designing or revisiting, sometimes refreshing core values from a company, we start working with the leader's personal values, because one fits each other. And also when it comes to people, you cannot be working in a company that promotes, toxic or aggressive behaviors that doesn't align with your values. You're going to suffer every day at work. So I think that's important to make that connection between what you stand for as an individual and what the company stands for and what are their values. But of course, in the end, there needs to be some agreement. What are the collective values? And we need to make sure that those values are guiding the decisions that we make together.
That's great. I talk about company culture cornerstones, which are mission, vision, values. And then the fourth cornerstone that everybody needs is accountability. So one question I have for you is, once you get this established, how do you advise people to not only train people on the values and engage them on the values, but then hold people accountable to living those out and ideally, I think, memorizing them?
Yeah, sure. Memorizing starts with keeping it simple, no? So I always say, don't 3-4 values. When you have 20, then people get where we really stand for. One thing that's critical in the process of, we talk about mapping the current culture, then we assess it, and let's say we are designing the future state. We have new values, we have a new mission, we have a purpose, we have new behaviors that we want to adopt. There are 3 steps. One is defining. So leaders need to define what the new or ideal future culture looks like. The second stage starts by them role modeling. So how are they going to demonstrate those values? If I, as a leader, don't start demonstrating and showing up the right behavior, then I cannot demand people, which is the third step, to do that. So it's define what the company culture is, demonstrate as a leader those behaviors, and then demand what are the expectations in terms of behaviors from people.
Okay. And then you also are an expert in hybrid workplaces, remote work. You wrote a book called Remote Not Distant. How does that transcend when you've got people either 100% in the office in a hybrid type of work situation or 100% remote? How do you maintain those values in an organization when people are in these different work environments and often on their own?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing is that the pandemic and the disruption that the workplace had a few years ago basically not only accelerated certain trends that were already in place, like people starting to work remotely, but also it magnified and amplified the issues that were happening. First of all, the office was never the company culture, no? We tend to have an office-centric approach to culture, like a ping pong table, snacks, a lot of perks, but actually those necessarily weren't the company, weren't the values. And I think that the realization is people can work remotely or in a hybrid, flexible setting and still have a strong culture. There are many companies that have been operating like that for many years. Not only tech companies, but actually a lot of traditional companies that have global teams that they never met each other, but they have been operating like in hybrid because they have different time zones, and they were very successful. Conversely, there were many companies that worked in the same place and their culture were really toxic. So I think that the first challenge is to let go of the idea that if people are not always together, they're not having a strong culture. It's like a bad marriage. You can be sleeping on the same bed, living under the same roof, but that doesn't guarantee that there's love or connection there, if you know what I mean. No?
Yeah. So give me an example of an organization that has remote workers. Let's just focus on that. Has remote workers, yet they have those remote workers fully engaged in their culture. How do they do that?
Well, they are very intentional. And I think that the organizations that work good before they transition to this new model pretty fast, companies like Spotify or Airbnb, they already have strong culture in place, so they were able to transition. Now they have a work from anywhere, anytime policy, which means that people can choose where they want to work, but most importantly, when. So not only they give location flexibility, but they give people a schedule flexibility, because that's the magic of working in a hybrid environment. People can decide when I'm more productive as a team member. Do I want to work in the morning, late at night, a little bit of both? Me personally, I thrive at night. So when I have to do my writing or prepare a workshop for my clients, I can do it at 8, 9, or stay past midnight. I'm thriving, but 7 a.m., not so much. So what are they doing good? I think they were doing good in terms of codifying what the culture is, first of all, being very clear, but also providing flexibility or freedom with accountability or discipline. So as I mentioned, people have the freedom to choose when and where they work from, but also their commitments. So it's not a free-for-all. People have certain times in which everyone's available, what we call collaboration time. So everyone's available to do that. They also invest time in building those connections. Even fully remote companies, they bring their teams back once per quarter, not necessarily the whole company, but per team, to make sure that they spend time together. For example, Slack, they bring their teams together they go out for dinner. They spend most of the time, they're not working, but they are building those relationships. So when they get back to working remotely, people have a strong relation with their colleagues.
That's an interesting thing, particularly with task-oriented people like myself. So would you please expand on that a little bit? How do you help someone who's very task-oriented realize that relational time that they're going to have with their peers, their teammates, actually has a lot of value? It's not work per se, but actually it helps their work in building those relationships. Whereas they may be thinking, I really just need to get back to my work.
Well, yeah, no. And I'm very task-oriented myself as well, but it's important that the sense of belonging, so the glue that brings people together, those personal relationships are key. There's a lot of science and a lot of research that shows that the more you know your teammates personally, the better you're going to collaborate, the better you're going to trust them, the more you're going to communicate with them. And once again, this doesn't mean that you need to be friends with them. That's not the purpose. You can, if you want. It's about getting to know them well as individuals, getting to know their superpowers, their kryptonites, their flaws. We do one exercise, for example, that it's writing your washing instructions. No? Since we were kids, we were told treat others the way you want to be treated, but that's wrong. Each person wants to be treated differently. And the same way that our clothes come with a washing instruction, each person has their washing instruction. Some people don't want to be interrupted. Some people don't like to be put on the spot in front of a large crowd. Some people are more, they talk to think. Some people need to think to talk. There are different ways. And when team members write their instructions and how they want to know, if you have something urgent, call me by phone. Don't send me an email. Like communication preferences or nuances, that creates a lot of stronger communications and relationships among their colleagues.
Yeah, it's interesting over the years, and that I've learned, the treat others the way they want to be treated, which people call the golden rule, based on a teaching of Jesus many years ago. And if you look at the teaching, actually, he is saying what you're saying, is that treat others the way they want to be treated, which some people refer to as the platinum rule. And I like your clothing instructions, the washing instructions, That's a good analogy. That's a good way to do it, so you can really understand that. Wondering about, you did this book, you probably did a lot of research into the book. And what are some of the examples of like the worst and best practices that you uncovered when you were putting together the book?
Yeah, best practices have to do with mindset and the worst as well, which is this is a turning point. The hybrid workplace is not going to go back, and it's actually going to accelerate. And the people who are resisting it are only going to lose all the momentum, are going to lose the learning, and they're going to basically going to left behind. People are being very intentional, and leaders who are succeeding in this new environment are the ones who realize that they don't have the answer. No one has. These are uncharted waters. So rather than try to be in control, the leaders that realize, hey, I need to facilitate the conversations. I need to involve my team. I need to experiment. We need to test and try and iterate. Those are the ones who are doing great. There's a company called GoTo, which are the creators of the GoTo communication software, lots of communication platforms, GoToMeetings, etc. And they realize that, and the CEO at some point say, hey, after 1 year in the pandemic, we're doing great. What if we become a remote first company? People have the choice. We are going to still have offices. And one of the things they did is they create different personas, different groups to understand the needs, because people that are younger probably want to be closer to the office, to build relationships, to learn by observing. They don't have a nice space for them to work at home. People with family members that need to take care of with kids and prefer working from home or more flexibility. So they design different experiences based on those personas. But also when it comes to creating a sense of belonging, that glue that we talked about earlier, they realize that you cannot impose that connection. No? You mentioned that for task-driven people, you cannot force them to. So they started doing activities based on passion points. For example, a lot of people, you mentioned Jesus, like to volunteer, like to help others. So they started organizing people going to food banks in different cities. And we met, we work in the same company. Maybe we never worked together, but we actually collaborate in those projects to help others. And that's how they build culture. So that's a very different approach. Rather than think of a one size fits all across company, they start thinking per region, per city, based on people's passion points and proximity.
I love that example. I really do, because that is, they create a menu, not too long of a menu, too many options, but they create some different options so you can kind of pick and choose where you want to engage. And I remember being with a couple of distributors in the computer industry and going to their events to speak at their events. And many of them over the past decade have incorporated a day-long event before the main event, where you can come early, and that day-long event is to work for a charity, like assembling bicycles or something like that. Mm-hmm. They're going to be given away. And it's a great bonding time for people to just, find commonality. They already have that because they're showing up for that activity that they want to do. So they share that in common, and they build off of that. So, well, that's great. And then you also have your company, which is called Fearless Culture. I love the name, by the way. So Fearless Culture, talk about fear. Where is fear in culture, and how does that play?
I mean, first of all, fearless doesn't mean the absence of fear, but it's about facing our fears. That's important. No, so when the opposite to fearless is fearful, and many companies, unfortunately, are driven by fear. The fear of screwing up, the fear of making mistakes, the fear of being blamed for your own errors, lots of red tape, lots of rules in place, lot of hierarchy and politics and power play. So fearless is about we want to be more innovative. Every company needs to innovate. Every company needs to move faster. They need to be more adaptive. The world has been changing since it started, and it's going to get worse or better for me. So we need to deal with our fears. We need to deal with the fears of not knowing, not having all the answers, to experimenting in new uncharted waters. in the SEAL, for example, Navy SEALs, when people are trained, one of the key skills that they have to develop is to deal with their own fears. They say that if you're not connected to your fears, you're dead. Fear is like a signal. So when you're going into the jungle or you're going to cross the street, the fear of getting hit by a car, that's what keeps you awake and basically focused. However, if you let your fears dominate how you behave, then you're not going to do anything. So it's about being more accepting of your fear, but also managing a better response towards that fear that you're feeling, that signal.
Oh, I love what you say. And it reminds me over the last 2 years, I think it's been that I've learned that there's some teachings out there that say there's two major emotions we have, fear, and the opposite is love. And then I think of what you just said, and then how you gave the example of the go-to company, GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, the rest of them, how those, the way they organize those touch points for different people to engage really showed a method of love or respect for each of those individuals, respecting their differences and giving them opportunities to engage in different ways. And love what you say also about the fear and the Navy SEAL example. Don't think that you can live without fear, but being aware of it, it's a survival skill when it's applied properly. So that's really powerful. What as we kind of wrap up here, what would you say is some of the strongest advice that you can give some of our audience when they're thinking about their company culture, or they're thinking about how to really get everyone on the same page in this environment where more people are going hybrid and more people are going to remote work?
Yeah, there are two things. First, you need to trust people more than ever, and you need to assume positive intent. So GitLab, which is a tech company, they have this principle that's called the short toes principle. Basically, they assume that everyone has short toes, so no one ever steps on someone else's toes. So that's a positive kind of intent approach. The second thing is about a company culture is a collective effort. So it's co-created and co-owned by everyone. Of course, leaders have the responsibility for having a good culture, but creating it's everyone's effort. It's like the culture of any city. Yeah, the mayor might define certain parameters, might define if this city is a two-way street, what are the speed limits, and so on and so forth. But if people walk, drive a car, which color of the car, which music they hear when they are driving the car, that's on people. So that connection between certain principles and rules that leaders establish and people's own choices and behavior is the result of what culture is all about. So don't own it in the sense that you want to be prescriptive. Invite people to a conversation and co-create it. Of course, you are the end a owner in terms of making sure the culture is healthy and helps your company move where you want to go.
Yeah, I love both those points, and especially like the one you made initially of assume positive intent, but it's kind of assume but confirm. Going back to what you said on the fear side. So, but you have to lean towards first assuming positive intent. I think that's great. So, where can people go, Gustavo, to learn more about what you're doing and to pick up your book?
Absolutely. My book is available on many online retailers, of course, Amazon, but also Walmart.com, Target, and many Barnes and Nobles and many others. So if they Google remote, not distant book, they're going to find it pretty easily. And if they want to chat with me or learn more about it, they can go to LinkedIn. I'm the only Gustavo Razzetti, ZZT, so that's easy to find. And I'm very active on LinkedIn. And also they can go to our website, fearlessculture.design. It's .design, not .com. And one thing that's important, especially for entrepreneurs, we have over 600 articles about culture, design, and leadership. Very simple, very actionable, with lots of insights, both for our in-person or hybrid culture. And there's a lot of tools that people can download. They're free to use if they want to start building the culture. And if they also need help, they can reach out and see how we can work with them.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a great conversation. I'm sure there's some great tips for our people to implement.
Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure, and I hope the audience enjoyed the talk as much as we did.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you like the episode with Gustavo, please subscribe, leave us a comment or rating. Hey, we love any feedback. Don't forget our sponsor, Habitly.com. Check it out. You can get 7 days free. Go try an episode, try a course, try it with your team. Really great for team. Don't just focus on hard skills with your team. Focus on developing their soft skills. And again, thanks for joining us. Stay tuned. We got more great guests coming. Bye for now.